If you work in law enforcement or any job where you see things that don't add up, you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. Hit that like button and subscribe, because this story gets stranger than anything you've heard. My name is Robert Castellano, and in 1987 I was working as a customs inspector at the Marfa Station border crossing in West Texas. If you've never heard of Marfa, that's because it's the kind of place the government likes to keep quiet. Population 3,000, sitting in the high desert about 60 miles north of the Mexican border, surrounded by nothing but scrub brush and heat shimmer for as far as you can see. The official crossing point was even more isolated, a 2-lane road cutting through the desert, a small inspection station with 3 bays, and a trailer that served as our office. During the day, we'd see maybe 20 vehicles, mostly locals, a few tourists heading to Big Bend, the occasional commercial truck hauling legitimate cargo. Standard border work, routine inspections, nothing exciting. But the night shift was different. The night shift was when the trucks came. I started at Marfa in June 1987, transferred from El Paso where I'd done 3 years of standard border work. The transfer was supposed to be a promotion, a reward for good performance and keeping my head down. More money, less supervision, and a lot more overtime. What they didn't tell me during the interview was why the position was open in the first place. My first night, I met the other 2 officers on my shift. Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran who'd worked Marfa since it opened in 1979, and James Reeves, former military police who'd been at the station for about a year. We worked the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, just the 3 of us and the desert. Santos gave me the orientation during the first hour, standard procedures, inspection protocols, how to run the X-ray equipment they'd installed last year. It was all by the book until we got to the part about the 3 a.m. trucks. You'll see them starting around 2:45, Santos said. Always commercial vehicles, 18-wheelers mostly. They'll have proper paperwork, proper permits, everything will look legitimate. Your job is to wave them through. I frowned. Without inspection, Santos confirmed. They're part of a federal program, above our clearance level. We log them, we verify the manifest matches the permit number, and we let them pass. Don't open the containers, don't X-ray them, don't even approach the driver with questions beyond basic identification. What kind of federal program? I asked. The kind where asking questions gets you transferred to Alaska, Reeves said. He wasn't smiling. Look, Castellano, we all wondered the same thing when we started. But this is Marfa. This station exists for one reason, and it's not to catch tourists with too much tequila. Just follow the protocols, collect your paycheck, and don't think too hard about what you're not supposed to see. That should have been my first warning. But I was young, I needed the job, and $1,500 a month plus overtime was more money than I'd ever made. So I nodded and accepted it. The first week was quiet. We'd process the handful of vehicles that came through during our shift, do our paperwork, and wait. Around 2:30 a.m. each night, Santos would get a phone call on the direct line in the office. She'd answer it, listen for a few seconds without speaking, then hang up. 10 minutes later, the trucks would start arriving. They were always the same. White, Peterbilt tractors pulling unmarked 40-foot containers. The drivers were professionals, silent and efficient, handing over manifests without making eye contact. The paperwork was always perfect. Permit numbers, cargo descriptions, destination addresses, everything matched exactly. The cargo descriptions were what bothered me. Agricultural equipment, construction materials, industrial parts. Generic enough to be plausible, specific enough to look legitimate. But something about them felt wrong. The weight listed on the manifest didn't match what I'd expect for those cargo types. Construction materials that weighed too little. Agricultural equipment that was too heavy. I mentioned it to Santos on my 4th night. She cut me off before I could finish the observation. The manifests are correct, she said firmly. If the numbers match the permit, the cargo is what it says it is. That's all you need to know. But they don't make sense, I pressed. I've inspected hundreds of commercial shipments. These numbers are off. Santos leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. Listen to me carefully, Castellano. I've been doing this for 8 years. I've seen 5 other inspectors come through this station during that time. The ones who followed protocols are still working in customs. The ones who got curious are gone. One retired early with full medical disability after he tried to open one of those containers. Another just disappeared, transferred somewhere his own family couldn't find him. You want to keep this job? You do what I tell you, and you don't ask questions. The warning was clear enough. But Santos had made a mistake by telling me someone had tried to open a container. That meant whatever was inside was worth protecting with serious consequences. And that made me more curious, not less. I started keeping my own log. Nothing official, just a notebook where I recorded details about the 3 a.m. trucks. Arrival times, permit numbers, manifest descriptions, driver descriptions. I noted patterns. The trucks came 4 nights a week, never on the same schedule. Some weeks it was Monday through Thursday. Other weeks it was scattered through the weekend. But always between 2:45 and 3:15 a.m. The drivers rotated, but I started recognizing faces. There were maybe 10 different drivers total, all fitting the same profile. Hispanic males, 30s to 50s, with the careful neutral expressions of people who'd been trained not to show emotion. They never spoke beyond the minimum required for identification. They never made small talk. And they never, ever looked directly at any of us for more than a second. In my 3rd week, I noticed something else. The trucks always came from the south, crossing from Mexico into the U.S. But according to the manifests, the cargo originated from U.S. companies. Agricultural equipment from Dallas, construction materials from Houston, industrial parts from San Antonio, all heading north to destinations in New Mexico and Colorado. That made no sense. Why would U.S. cargo cross into Mexico just to cross back? The only explanation was that whatever was really in those containers wasn't U.S. agricultural equipment or construction materials. It was something else entirely. Something that needed the appearance of legitimate commercial traffic to avoid scrutiny. I shared my observations with Reeves during a slow night in week 4. He listened without interrupting, then looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. You're smart, Castellano. That's going to be a problem for you here. Because smart people ask questions, and this is not a place where questions are welcome. So, what's your advice? I asked. Stop keeping that notebook for one thing. Whatever you've written down, burn it. Then forget everything you think you've noticed and do your job the way Santos told you. Wave the trucks through. Collect your paycheck. And if you can't do that, put in for a transfer now before this situation gets worse. What situation? Reeves glanced toward the office where Santos was doing paperwork. The situation where your curiosity gets someone hurt. This isn't just some bureaucratic cover-up, Robert. There are serious people involved in whatever's happening here. The kind of people who don't leave witnesses. You think that inspector who tried to open a container got a medical retirement because he was clumsy? He opened that container and saw something he wasn't supposed to see. 2 days later, his hands didn't work anymore. Nerve damage, the doctor said. Spontaneous onset. Untreatable. A 28-year-old man with perfectly healthy hands suddenly can't grip a steering wheel or hold a pen. That's not a coincidence. That's a message. I wanted to dismiss it as paranoia, but the way Reeves said it, with that flat certainty in his voice, made it clear he believed every word. And if he believed it after a year at this station, maybe I should take it seriously too. But I didn't burn the notebook. I hid it better, started being more careful about my observations. But I kept recording, because something was happening at this remote border crossing, something important enough to threaten federal inspectors who got too curious, and I needed to understand what it was. The answer started revealing itself in my 6th week, during a night that began like any other. We processed a few cars around midnight, did our routine equipment checks, and settled in to wait for the phone call. It came at 2:32 a.m. Santos answered, listened, hung up, right on schedule. The first truck arrived at 2:51 a.m. Standard white Peterbilt, unmarked container, professional driver who handed over the manifest without speaking. I logged the permit number while Santos verified the paperwork. Everything matched. I waved him through and he rolled north into the darkness. The second truck arrived at 2:58 a.m. Same profile, same routine. But as I was logging the details, I noticed something. The permit number was 1 digit different from the first truck. Not unusual on its own, but when I checked my hidden notebook later, I realized those 2 permit numbers were part of a sequence. Over the past 6 weeks, I'd recorded 47 trucks, and their permit numbers followed a pattern. They weren't random government permits. They were sequential, indicating a single, organized operation. The third truck arrived at 3:04 a.m., and that's when everything changed. The driver handed over his manifest and I started the standard verification. But as I read the cargo description, my blood went cold. Agricultural equipment, 18,500 pounds. That was the same description, same weight as the second truck. Actually, when I checked against my memory, it was the same as at least a dozen other trucks I'd logged. I looked up at the driver. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight, sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool desert night. That was the first time I'd seen one of these drivers show any emotion at all. "Everything okay?" I asked in Spanish. He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken, just kept staring ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. I glanced back at the manifest. Everything was in order. Permit number matched, cargo description matched, destination address matched. But something was wrong with this truck. I could feel it in the way the driver was acting, in the tension radiating from his rigid posture. Santos appeared at my shoulder. "Problem, Castellano?" "No problem," I said, handing back the manifest. "Just verifying the numbers. Then wave him through. We're on a schedule." I stepped back and signaled the driver to proceed. He didn't wait for a full clearance gesture, just hit the accelerator and rolled through the checkpoint so fast his trailer fishtailed slightly on the turn. Within seconds, he was gone into the night, taillights disappearing north. "That was odd," Reeves said, joining us as we watched the truck vanish. "I've never seen one of them in a hurry before." Santos pulled me aside once Reeves walked back to the office. "What did you say to him?" "Just asked if everything was okay." Standard question. "In Spanish or English?" "Spanish." "Don't do that again," Santos said. "These drivers have instructions not to engage in conversation. When you try to talk to them, you're creating a situation where they have to choose between following their instructions and being rude to a federal officer. That creates stress. Stress creates mistakes. Mistakes get people hurt." I nodded, but I was thinking about the driver's expression. That hadn't been stress about following instructions. That had been fear. Real, deep fear of something much worse than an annoyed customs inspector. The rest of the shift passed without incident. We processed a few more cars as the sun came up, did our end-of-shift paperwork, and went home. But I couldn't stop thinking about that driver's face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that terrified expression, the white knuckles on the steering wheel. the way he'd accelerated through the checkpoint like something was chasing him. Finally, around noon, I got up and drove into Marfa proper. There's a diner there that's been serving Border Patrol and Customs officers since the 1960s. If anyone would talk honestly about the station, it would be retired officers who no longer had to worry about keeping their jobs. I found exactly who I was looking for. Leonard Pritchard, a 72-year-old former Border Patrol agent who'd worked the area for 30 years before retiring in 1985. He was sitting in his usual corner booth, working through a plate of eggs and reading the El Paso Times. "Mr. Pritchard," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "My name's Robert Castellano. I'm working at the Marfa station. I was hoping you might be willing to talk about the history of the crossing." He looked at me over his newspaper, eyes sharp despite his age. "You're the new night shift inspector. Word travels fast in a small town." "Yes, sir. And you want to know about the trucks?" I didn't confirm or deny it. I just waited. Pritchard folded his newspaper and set it aside. "How long you been working there?" 6 weeks. So you're past the orientation phase. You've seen enough to know something's not right, but not enough to understand what you're dealing with." He sipped his coffee. "I'll tell you what I tell everyone who comes asking. The Marfa station has been handling special traffic since 1979. Nobody knows exactly what's in those containers because nobody who's tried to find out has had a good outcome. The smart play is to do your job, cash your checks, and don't dig any deeper." "But you know something," I said. "You worked this area for 30 years. You had to have seen things." "I saw plenty," Pritchard said. "I saw good officers get curious and disappear. I saw one young woman, couldn't have been more than 25, try to investigate on her own. She climbed the fence one night, tried to follow one of those trucks after it left the station. They found her 3 days later wandering in the desert, completely dehydrated. No memory of what happened during those 72 hours. She never worked in customs again. Took a job at a grocery store in Amarillo and refuses to talk about that night. What do you think is in the containers?" Pritchard was quiet for a long moment. "I think there are some things the government does that can't be explained to the public. I think there are operations that exist in the gray areas between legal and necessary. And I think the Marfa station is part of one of those operations. Whether that means drugs, weapons, people, or something else entirely, I don't know. But I know the operation has protection at the highest levels. And I know that asking too many questions is a good way to end up like that young woman, or worse." He leaned forward. "You seem like a good kid, Castellano. Smart, observant, the kind of officer we need. So here's my advice, and I'm only going to say it once. Whatever you think you're going to uncover, whatever truth you're chasing, it's not worth it. The people running this operation have unlimited resources and no oversight. They will destroy your life without hesitation if you become a problem. So do yourself a favor. Forget you ever had questions. Do your job. And when you've saved enough money, transfer to a normal station and live a normal life." I left the diner with more questions than answers, but Pritchard had confirmed what I'd already suspected. The trucks were part of something big, something protected, and something dangerous to investigate. The smart move would be to take his advice and stop digging. But I've never been particularly smart about these things. That night, I returned to work with a plan. I couldn't open the containers. I couldn't X-ray them. But I could document everything more carefully. Arrival times down to the second. Exact descriptions of the drivers. Any detail that might help me understand the pattern. The shift started normally. A few cars, routine inspections, waiting for the phone call. It came at 2:29 a.m. Santos answered, listened, hung up. But this time, I was watching her face when she hung up the phone, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Just for a second, a flash of genuine fear before she composed herself. "What is it?" I asked. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "Just the usual notification. Trucks inbound." But it wasn't the usual notification. I could tell from the way her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up her coffee cup, from the way Reeves came out of the bathroom looking pale and tense. The first truck arrived at 2:47 a.m. standard routine, standard paperwork. I logged it and waved it through. The second truck arrived at 2:54 a.m., also standard. But as I watched it roll through the checkpoint, I noticed something. The container was sitting lower on the chassis than usual. The suspension was compressed, indicating the cargo was heavier than normal. The third truck arrived at 3:01 a.m., and that's when I knew something was very wrong. The driver who stepped out wasn't one of the usual professionals. He was younger, maybe mid-20s, and he was terrified. His hands shook as he handed over the manifest. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool night air. And when our eyes met, I saw pure panic. I took the manifest and started reading. Agricultural equipment, 22,000 pounds. But that weight was impossible. The truck's suspension was nearly bottomed out. Whatever was in that container weighed at least twice what the manifest claimed. "Sir," I said carefully, "I need to verify your cargo weight." The driver's eyes went wide. "No," he said in heavily accented English. "No, verify. Paper's good. You let through. Standard protocol requires verification of any load that appears to exceed." "Paper's good," the driver shouted, loud enough that Santos and Reeves both came running. "You let through now." Santos pushed past me and grabbed the manifest. "Everything's in order," she said, shoving the papers back at the driver. "Proceed." "But the weight is clearly wrong," I said. "Look at the suspension. That container weighs at least 40,000 pounds, not 22. "The weight on the manifest is correct," Santos said, her voice hard. "Wave him through now." I looked at Reeves, hoping for backup, but he was staring at the ground, refusing to meet my eyes. The driver climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and rolled through his checkpoint. The container scraped against the undercarriage as he hit the slight incline past our station. Whatever was inside wasn't agricultural equipment. In the office, Santos turned on me. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking that truck was clearly overweight and potentially dangerous. If that suspension fails on the highway—" "That's not your concern," Santos interrupted. "Your concern is following protocols. The manifest said 22,000 pounds. You verify the number matches and you let it through. That's the protocol. But the actual weight is not your concern." Santos was shouting now, something I'd never seen her do. "You check the paperwork. You verify the numbers match. You wave the truck through. That's the entire scope of your job. Anything beyond that is above your pay grade and outside your authority." "I need to report this," I said. "That truck was dangerously overweight. If it—" "You report nothing," Santos said. "You forget this happened. You go home, you sleep, you come back tomorrow and do your job properly." Is that clear? It wasn't clear. Nothing about this was clear. But I nodded anyway because I recognized that look in her eyes. It was the same look I'd seen on the driver's face. Fear. Pure, desperate fear of something much worse than a bureaucratic reprimand. I went home, but I didn't sleep. I sat at my Kit Vogel table with my notebook, writing down every detail I could remember about that overweight truck. The permit number, the driver's description, the exact way the suspension had been compressed. And I decided that whatever was happening at the Marfa station, whatever those trucks were really carrying, I was going to find out, even if it cost me everything. I spent the next week watching Santos and Reeves more carefully than I watched the trucks. They were both on edge, jumping at sounds, checking their watches constantly between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. like they were expecting something terrible to happen. Whatever had spooked them about that overweight truck, they weren't sharing it with me. The trucks kept coming, 4 or 5 per night, all following the same pattern. But now I was noticing details I'd missed before. The drivers never arrived in sequence. They'd show up in seemingly random order, different intervals between each truck. Except the intervals weren't random. When I charted them in my notebook, I found a pattern. The trucks were spaced exactly 12 minutes apart, give or take 30 seconds. That kind of precision required coordination, a central dispatcher somewhere controlling the timing. On my 8th week at Marfa, everything changed. I was doing a routine perimeter check around 2 a.m. when I found tire tracks leading away from the station's parking area. Fresh tracks, made sometime in the past few hours. They led north, parallel to the highway but staying off the road, following a dirt path that wound through the scrub brush. I followed the tracks for about 200 yards until they stopped at a small clearing. Someone had parked there recently, sat for a while based on the depression in the dust, then driven away. But what caught my attention was what they'd left behind. Cigarette butts. 14 of them, all the same Mexican brand. Someone had been watching our station for hours, smoking and waiting. When I returned to the checkpoint, I found Reeves in the equipment room. I showed him the cigarette butts. "Someone's surveilling us," I said. "These are fresh, probably from tonight." Reeves looked at the butts, then at me. "Put those back where you found them. We should report this." "Someone's watching the station," I said. "Put them back." Reeves repeated, his voice harder. "And forget you saw them. That's not surveillance. That's insurance. What does that mean?" "It means someone makes sure we're doing our jobs properly. Someone makes sure the trucks get through without problems. And if they see you collecting evidence, if they think you're trying to cause trouble, they'll make you the problem instead." He took the cigarette butts from my hand and walked toward the door. "I'll dispose of these. You go back to work and forget this conversation happened." But I couldn't forget. If someone was watching us, monitoring our activities, that meant the operation was even bigger than I'd thought. And it meant that my questions, my notebook, my curiosity, might have already been noticed. That night, the phone call came at 2:33 a.m. Santos answered, but this time the conversation was different. She spoke, actually said words instead of just listening. "Yes," she said, "I understand. It won't happen again." Then she hung up and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Reeves, take Castellano into the office," she said. "I'll handle the trucks tonight." "That's not protocol," I said. "We always work the trucks as a team." "Tonight's different," Santos replied. "Go with Reeves, now." In the office, Reeves closed the door and pulled down the blinds. "Sit down," he said. "We need to talk." I sat. Reeves paced for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "That phone call wasn't just the usual notification. It was a warning. About you. Someone up the chain is concerned about your behavior. The questions, the observations, the incident with the overweight truck. They're worried you're becoming a liability." "Who's they? Does it matter?" Reeves stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "You're a good guy, Robert. I can tell you want to do the right thing, but you need to understand something. The right thing, in this situation, is to keep your head down and survive. Because the people running this operation, they don't care about doing right. They care about maintaining the operation, and they will remove any obstacle that threatens it. I'm a federal customs inspector. I have an obligation to report illegal activity. You have an obligation to follow the protocols you were given when you took this assignment. Those protocols say you verify manifests and wave trucks through. Nothing more. If you deviate from those protocols, you're the one breaking the rules, not them." Through the office window, I could see the first truck arriving. Santos handled it alone, checking the manifest, waving it through. She looked small out there, vulnerable in the pool of light from the checkpoint station. "What's really in those trucks?" I asked quietly. Reeves sat down across from me. "I don't know, not for certain, but I can tell you what I've pieced together over the past year. This station was established in 1979, right after the Iranian Revolution. That's not a coincidence. When the Shah fell, a lot of people needed to move things out of Iran quickly and quietly. Art, antiquities, documents, money. Some of it came through legitimate channels. Some of it didn't. The Marfa station was set up as a back door for that illegitimate traffic. That was 8 years ago. Why would it still be operating? Because once you build a pipeline like that, it's too valuable to shut down. After Iran, it was Nicaragua. After Nicaragua, it was Panama. Now it's probably related to the Mexican cartels, though I can't prove that. The point is, this station exists to move things that can't be moved through normal channels. Things that are too sensitive, too valuable, or too dangerous for regular customs oversight. But we're customs officers, I said. We're supposed to prevent illegal smuggling, not facilitate it. We're supposed to follow orders, Reeves corrected. And our orders are to let those trucks through. Whether that's right or wrong isn't our decision to make. That's for people way above our pay grade. The second truck arrived. Santos processed it quickly, efficiently. Through the window, I could see the driver's face in the checkpoint lights. Another of the regular professionals, calm and emotionless. Nothing like the terrified young driver from last week. "What happened to that driver?" I asked. "The scared one who came through with the overweight container?" Reeves was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, but I can tell you he's not driving for the operation anymore. When someone makes that kind of mistake, when they draw attention to the cargo by acting suspiciously, they don't get a second chance." "You mean they killed him?" "I mean he's not driving anymore," Reeves repeated. "What happened to him after that is speculation. But the operation has a reputation for cleaning up its mistakes thoroughly." We sat in silence watching Santos process the third truck. The routine was so smooth, so practiced. It was easy to see how someone could work here for years, cashing checks and following protocols, never really confronting what they were part of. "I can't do this," I said finally. "I can't just pretend this isn't happening." "Then you need to transfer out," Reeves said. "Request a reassignment. Take a pay cut if you have to, but get out of Marfa before your curiosity gets you hurt." "What about Santos? What about you? Don't you want to know the truth?" "I want to stay alive," Reeves said. "I want to work my 20 years and retire with my pension. I want to go home every night to my wife and kids. Those things are more important to me than knowing what's in those containers. And if you're smart, they'll be more important to you too. But I wasn't smart. I'd already proven that. Because even as Reeves was giving me his practical advice, I was planning how I'd follow the next truck that came through. How I'd track it north and see where it was really going. How I'd finally get answers to the questions that had been eating at me since my first week. The opportunity came 3 nights later. It was a slow shift, only 3 trucks scheduled. Santos had called in sick, leaving just me and Reeves to handle the checkpoint. The phone call came at 2:31 a.m. Reeves answered, listened, hung up. 3 inbound, he said. Standard procedure. The first 2 trucks came and went without incident, but the third truck, arriving at 3:09 a.m., had a problem. The driver handed over his manifest and I immediately saw the discrepancy. The destination address was wrong. Not missing, not unclear, but wrong. The address listed didn't exist. I'd memorized enough manifests by now to know the standard destinations, and this one was off by a single digit. I pointed this out to the driver in Spanish. He looked confused, checked his paperwork, then shrugged. "The address is what I was given. If there's a problem, call the dispatcher." Reeves came over. "What's the holdup?" "Address error on the manifest," I said. "The destination doesn't exist." Reeves checked the papers. "It's probably a typo." "Wave him through. The dispatcher will sort it out." "But protocol says we verify destination addresses," I argued. "If this container ends up at the wrong location, it won't," Reeves interrupted. "The driver knows where he's really going. The manifest address is just paperwork. Wave him through." I looked at the driver. "Where are you really taking this cargo?" The driver shifted uncomfortably. "North, that's all I know. Someone meets me at a truck stop past Fort Stockton and gives me the final destination." "Which truck stop?" The driver hesitated. "Look, man, I just drive. I don't ask questions. I don't know what's in the container and I don't want to know. They pay me to move it from point A to point B. That's it." Reeves pulled me aside. "Let him through. You're creating a situation." I made a decision in that moment. "Okay," I said. "Proceed." The driver looked relieved, climbed back into his truck, and rolled through the checkpoint. "I'll be right back," I told Reeves. "Bathroom break." I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to my truck, a beat-up Ford Bronco I'd parked behind the equipment shed. I'd kept it there specifically for this moment, hoping I'd get a chance to follow one of these trucks without Santos or Reeves noticing. Now was that chance. I pulled out of the station's rear access road with my headlights off, using the faint moonlight to navigate. The highway stretched north, and I could see the truck's taillights about a mile ahead. I kept my distance, staying far enough back that the driver wouldn't notice he was being followed. We drove for 40 minutes, passing through empty desert that looked like the surface of another planet in the moonlight. The truck maintained a steady 65 miles per hour, never varying its speed. Around 4 a.m., it took an exit near Fort Stockton, just like the driver had said. The truck stop was a rundown place that looked like it hadn't seen legitimate business in years. A few pumps, a dark convenience store, and a parking area with maybe 10 spaces. The truck pulled in and stopped. I parked across the highway, watching through binoculars. A black SUV arrived 15 minutes later. 2 men got out, both dressed like businessmen despite the early hour. They spoke briefly with the driver. Then one of them produced a handheld device and spent several minutes walking around the container, running the device along its sides like he was scanning it. After about 20 minutes, the businessmen seemed satisfied. They handed the driver something, probably final destination instructions, and got back in their SUV. The truck started up again and pulled out of the parking lot, heading north toward Midland. I followed from a distance. We drove another hour, entering the outskirts of Midland just as the sun was coming up. The truck took several turns through industrial areas, finally stopping at a warehouse complex near the railroad tracks. The area was fenced, guarded, clearly private property with serious security. I parked on a side street where I could see the warehouse entrance with my binoculars. The truck backed up to a loading dock and a crew of workers in white coveralls came out. They weren't warehouse workers. They moved with military precision, communicating with hand signals, checking the area constantly like they expected trouble. They opened the container, and even from a distance I could see something was wrong with whatever was inside. The workers donned respirators before approaching the cargo, not the kind you wear around chemicals. Heavy-duty gear with sealed suits, like they were dealing with something biological. Through the binoculars, I watched them unload crates from the container. Standard wooden crates, about 3 feet by 3 feet, but they handled them with extreme care, like the contents were fragile or dangerous or both. They loaded the crates onto pallets and moved them inside the warehouse with a forklift. I counted 17 crates total. Then the workers came back out, sealed the empty container, and the truck driver was given clearance to leave. The whole operation took less than an hour. I waited until the truck was gone, then tried to get closer to the warehouse, but the security was too tight. Cameras everywhere, guards patrolling, no way to approach without being seen. I was about to give up when I saw something that changed everything. A man emerged from the warehouse removing his respirator. Even from a distance, I recognized him. Federal agent, based on the badge visible on his belt. DEA, maybe, or ATF. He spoke into a radio, nodded at something, then got into a government sedan and drove away. Federal agents were involved. This wasn't just a cartel operation tolerated by corrupt border officials. This was a sanctioned government operation, with federal oversight and protection. Whatever was in those containers, it was important enough to involve multiple agencies. I drove back to Marfa in a daze, arriving just as my shift was ending. Reeves was waiting for me at the station, his expression grim. "Where the hell have you been?" "Bathroom break ran long," I said. "Stomach trouble." "For 5 hours?" Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I covered for you with the morning shift. Told them you had a family emergency and left early. But Santos knows something's wrong. She called twice asking where you were. I appreciate that," I said. "Don't thank me yet, because now I need to know what you did. Did you follow that truck?" I couldn't lie convincingly, so I didn't try. "I followed it to Midland, to a warehouse where federal agents were waiting. They unloaded cargo in hazmat suits, Reeves. Whatever's in those containers requires biological safety protocols." Reeves grabbed my arm. "You stupid son of a bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? If they know you followed that truck, if they know you saw the transfer point, how would they know?" I interrupted. I was careful. I stayed at a distance. Nobody saw me. "They always know," Reeves said. "They have spotters, counter-surveillance, probably tracking devices on the trucks. If you followed one north, they know about it. And that means we have maybe 24 hours before someone comes to deal with you." "Deal with me how?" Reeves let go of my arm. "I don't know, but it won't be pleasant. The best thing you can do right now is run. Get in your truck, drive to El Paso, catch a flight to anywhere. Don't go home. Don't contact anyone you know. Just disappear and hope they decide you're not worth chasing." "I can't just run. I'm a federal officer. I saw government agents involved in what might be illegal smuggling of biological materials. I need to report this." "Report it to who?" Reeves asked. "The people running this operation are federal agents, probably from multiple agencies. You think calling the Customs Oversight Board is going to help? They're either in on it or powerless to stop it. And the minute you make an official report, you put a target on your back that you'll never get removed. Then what do? You run," Reeves said. "Or you keep your mouth shut and pray they decide you're more useful alive than dead. Those are your only options." I went home, but I didn't pack. I couldn't run. Everything I'd worked for, my career, my reputation, my sense of duty, it all depended on standing my ground and doing the right thing. So I sat at my Kit Vogel table with my notebook, writing down everything I'd seen. The warehouse location, the federal agent's description, the biological safety protocols. If something happened to me, at least there would be a record. Around noon, someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Santos standing on my porch alone, looking nervous. I opened the door. "We need to talk," she said. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and she entered quickly, glancing up and down the street like she expected to be followed. In my living room, she sat on the edge of my couch, hands clasped tightly. "I know what you did last night," she said. "I know you followed the truck to Midland, and I know you saw the transfer point. How? Because I've done the same thing," Santos interrupted. 3 years ago, I followed a truck. I saw the warehouse. I saw the federal agents. And I nearly got killed for it. She pulled down the collar of her shirt, showing me a scar across her collarbone. bullet wound. I got shot trying to investigate further. They caught me trying to photograph the warehouse, and they put 2 rounds in me, left me for dead in the desert. I crawled 5 miles to the highway before someone found me. Jesus, I said. They told me I could either accept the official story, that I'd been injured in a cartel ambush while off duty, or I could tell the truth and spend the rest of my short life in a federal prison under some obscure national security statute. So I took the story. I came back to work, and I've spent the past 3 years doing exactly what I'm told, keeping my head down, trying to forget what I saw. What did you see? I asked. What's in the containers? Santos was quiet for a long moment. I don't know exactly, but I can tell you what I pieced together before they caught me. The operation started in 1979 as a way to move sensitive materials that couldn't go through normal channels. At first, it was probably political, helping allies move things discreetly. But at some point, it evolved into something else, something that requires biological safety protocols and federal oversight and absolute secrecy. She leaned forward. Have you heard of Project mkultra? The CIA mind control experiments in the 60s and 70s. Everyone's heard of mkultra, I said. What people don't know is that mkultra wasn't shut down in 1973. It was compartmentalized, moved into black budget operations that Congress can't oversee. One of those operations involves transporting experimental materials across the border for testing at secure facilities. The Marfa station is one of several checkpoints used to move those materials. You're saying those containers have mind-control drugs? I'm saying they contain biological materials related to consciousness research. Drugs, maybe. Or test subjects. Or results from experiments conducted in Mexico where American oversight doesn't apply. Whatever it is, it's dangerous enough to require hazmat protocols and valuable enough to protect with lethal force. The room felt very cold suddenly. If that's true, I said, we need to expose it. Go to the press, go to Congress. We'd be dead before the story broke, Santos interrupted. These people have unlimited resources and no accountability. They've been running this operation for 8 years without any scrutiny. You think they're going to let one customs inspector shut it down? Then what do? We survive, Santos said. We keep doing our jobs. We don't ask questions. We don't follow trucks. We collect our paychecks and we stay alive. It's not heroic, Robert, but it's the only option that doesn't end with us in the desert with bullet holes. I wanted to argue, wanted to insist there had to be another way, but Santos's scar and the fear in her eyes told me she was probably right. Still, I had to ask, do you ever regret not fighting harder? Not trying to expose this? Every day, Santos said quietly. Every single day I think about the people who might be hurt by whatever's in those containers. The test subjects, the communities exposed to experimental drugs, whoever's being used in these experiments. But I also think about my daughter. She's 12, she needs her mother. And if staying alive means doing a job I'm ashamed of, that's what I'm going to do. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. They're going to come talk to you. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. When they do, you tell them you made a mistake. You followed the truck out of curiosity, realized you were out of your depth, and you're never going to do it again. You act scared because you should be scared. You make them believe you're not a threat. And then you go back to work, and you never, ever deviate from protocol again. Understand? I understand, I said. But I didn't, not really, because even as Santos was driving away, even as I was processing the enormity of what I'd stumbled into, I was already planning my next move. I couldn't run. I couldn't just accept this. There had to be a way to expose the operation without getting killed. I just hadn't figured out what it was yet. The knock came at 8 p.m. 2 men in dark suits, federal badges, expressions that said they'd done this kind of visit before. Agent Morrison from the DEA and Agent Price from some agency he didn't name. They asked politely if they could come inside. I let them. "Mr. Castellano," Morrison said, once we were seated in my living room. "We understand you've been having some concerns about the operations at Marfa Station. We'd like to discuss those concerns and help you understand the bigger picture." "I'm listening," I said. "What you saw in Midland," Price said, "is part of a classified federal operation with oversight from multiple agencies. The cargo being transported is sensitive but entirely legal within the scope of our authorization. We can't provide specific details due to national security restrictions, but we can assure you that proper protocols are being followed." "Biological safety protocols," I said. "Those containers require hazmat suits to unload. What kind of legal cargo requires that level of protection?" "The kind that's none of your concern," Morrison said, his tone hardening slightly. "Your job is to verify manifests at a border checkpoint. What happens to the cargo after it leaves your station isn't part of your jurisdiction or your responsibility. I'm a federal officer. If I witness potential violations—" "You witnessed a classified operation," Price interrupted. "One that you had no authorization to observe. By following that truck, by conducting unauthorized surveillance, you violated federal law. We could charge you with espionage, obstruction of justice, and a dozen other charges that would put you in prison for 20 years. He let that sink in, then continued in a softer tone. "But we're not going to do that. We understand curiosity. We understand that good officers sometimes cross lines because they're trying to do the right thing. So, we're giving you a choice. You can accept that this operation is beyond your clearance level, return to your duties at Marfa, and never mention what you saw. Or you can insist on making this a problem, in which case we'll have no choice but to treat you as a security threat." "What happens to security threats?" I asked. Price smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "They get transferred to positions where they can't cause trouble. Remote stations in Alaska. Desk jobs reviewing paperwork in basement offices. Sometimes they have accidents, car crashes, house fires, drug overdoses. It varies depending on how serious the threat is perceived to be." "Are you threatening me? We're clarifying your options," Morrison said. "You're a smart guy, Castellano. You've had a good career so far. Don't throw it away because you couldn't let go of something that doesn't concern you." They stood to leave. Price handed me a business card. "If you have any further questions or concerns, call this number. Someone will explain whatever you need to know within the limits of classification restrictions. But I strongly suggest you don't have any further questions. For your own safety." After they left, I sat in my dark living room for hours, thinking about everything I'd learned. The classified operation, the biological materials, the implicit threats, Santos's scar and Reeves's fear and the federal agent's absolute confidence that I wouldn't cause problems. They were probably right. I probably wouldn't. Because what could one customs inspector do against an operation with that level of protection and resources? But then I remembered something Pritchard had said at the diner. The young woman who'd tried to follow a truck and ended up wandering in the desert with no memory. At the time, I thought it was just a cautionary tale. Now, I wondered if there was more to it. I spent the rest of the night making calls, using my federal access to pull records on customs officers who'd worked at Marfa over the past 8 years. What I found disturbed me more than anything else. 14 officers had been assigned to the station since it opened in 1979. Only 3 were still working there. Santos, Reeves, and now me. The other 11 had all either transferred, resigned, retired on medical disability or died. 3 deaths in 8 years. That was a statistical anomaly that couldn't be coincidence. I pulled the incident reports. Car accident, house fire, drug overdose. Exactly what Agent Price had mentioned. I was in over my head, way over my head. But I'd also found something important. A pattern of suspicious deaths and disappearances that suggested this operation wasn't just morally questionable. It was actively eliminating anyone who became too curious about what was really happening at Marfa Station. And that meant whatever was in those containers. Whatever biological materials were being smuggled across the border under federal protection. It was worth killing for. I just had to decide if it was worth dying for. I didn't go back to work the next night. I called in sick, bought myself some time to think. Santos called my house 3 times, but I didn't answer. Reeves left a message warning me that calling in sick right after the federal visit made me look guilty. But I didn't care about looking guilty anymore. I cared about understanding what I'd stumbled into. I spent 2 days going through every resource I could access. Federal databases, archived news reports, academic papers on consciousness research and biological experimentation. What I found painted a disturbing picture that connected dots I hadn't even known existed. Project mkultra had officially ended in 1973, but dozens of sub-projects had continued under different names and classifications. One of them, codenamed Project Artichoke, focused on using biological agents to manipulate memory and consciousness. Another, Project mkultra, tested psychochemical weapons at military facilities. Both projects had officially been terminated, but budget line items suggested the research had simply moved to black budget operations. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. In 1982, there had been a lawsuit filed by families in a small Mexican border town. They claimed their relatives had disappeared after accepting offers to participate in medical studies conducted by American researchers. The suit was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds, the families received an undisclosed settlement, and the matter was sealed. The town was 80 miles south of the Marfa crossing. I cross-referenced the dates of the disappearances with my records of truck traffic through Marfa. The pattern matched. During the months when disappearances were highest, truck traffic had increased by 40%, and the manifests during that period all listed the same cargo description: agricultural equipment. The same description that appeared on the overweight truck that had terrified its driver. I was looking at evidence of human trafficking, not for labor or sex work, but for experimentation. The federal government was allowing, possibly even facilitating, the transport of Mexican nationals across the border to be used as test subjects in classified consciousness research programs. That's what required the biological safety protocols. Not because the cargo was chemically dangerous, but because the test subjects had been exposed to experimental agents that made them biohazards. They were being transported in sealed containers like laboratory animals, moved from testing facilities in Mexico to final disposition sites in the U.S. Final disposition. The euphemism made me sick. I had to see inside one of those containers. Had to confirm what I suspected. But I couldn't do it at the checkpoint, not with Santos and Reeves watching. And I couldn't follow another truck to Midland without being caught. So I needed a different approach. I spent my 3rd day off driving back roads around Marfa, learning the terrain, finding places where the highway could be observed from a distance. About 15 miles north of the checkpoint, I found what I was looking for: an old ranch access road that paralleled the highway but sat on higher ground, offering a clear view of northbound traffic. I parked there at 3 a.m. on my first night back, watching through binoculars as the trucks passed below. 3 came through that night, spaced 12 minutes apart as always. I noted their permit numbers, checked them against my records. All three had the agricultural equipment description. On the second night, I brought more equipment. A police scanner tuned to federal frequencies, a night vision monocular, and a tire deflation spike strip I'd borrowed from the equipment room at the checkpoint. I waited until the first truck passed, then moved onto the highway and laid out the spike strip in the northbound lane. Then I retreated to my observation point and waited. The second truck came through 12 minutes later, traveling at its usual, steady 65 miles per hour. The tires hit the spikes and I heard the sharp reports of air escaping. The truck didn't stop immediately. The driver probably thought he'd hit debris on the road. But after about a quarter mile, the handling became too unstable to continue. The truck pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Through the night vision monocular, I watched the driver get out, assess the damage, then pull out a radio. He spoke for about 30 seconds, then got back in the cab to wait. He'd called for help, which meant I had maybe 20 minutes before a support vehicle arrived. I hiked down from my observation point and approached the truck from behind, staying low. The driver was focused forward, watching for approaching headlights. He didn't see me slip around the back of the container. The seal was government issue, the kind used on classified shipments. I'd been trained to recognize them during my time in El Paso. Breaking it would be immediately obvious, so I had to be quick. I pulled out my knife and cut through the seal, then carefully opened the container's rear doors. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic, like a hospital, mixed with something organic and wrong. The container's interior was lit with dim red lights, and I could see rows of metal shelves along each wall. On the shelves were cages, standard laboratory animal cages, the kind used for primates. But these cages held people. There were 6 of them, 3 on each side. Young Mexican men, probably in their 20s, sedated and strapped to medical gurneys inside the cages. IVs ran into their arms, connected to bags of fluid I couldn't identify. Monitoring equipment blinked and hummed, displaying vital signs. But it was their heads that made me understand the true horror of what I was seeing. Each man had been subjected to some kind of cranial surgery. Their scalps were shaved, with surgical incisions visible under clear bandages. And through the bandages, I could see metallic implants embedded in their skulls. Electrodes, maybe, or some kind of neural interface. One of the men's eyes were open, staring at nothing. He wasn't conscious exactly, but he wasn't fully sedated either. His mouth moved silently, forming words I couldn't hear. His hands twitched against the restraints. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The cages, the subjects, the monitoring equipment, everything. I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That's when I heard the voice behind me. "Step away from the container, Mr. Castellano." I turned to find Agent Morrison standing 20 feet away, weapon drawn but not aimed at me. Agent Price was behind him, speaking into a radio. On the highway beyond them, I could see headlights approaching fast, the support vehicle. "You couldn't leave it alone," Morrison said, almost sadly. "We gave you every opportunity to walk away, every warning, but you kept pushing. These are people," I said, gesturing at the container. "You're transporting human beings like cargo, experimenting on them. This is worse than anything mkultra ever did." "You're right," Morrison said. "It is worse. Because the research conducted under mkultra was crude, ineffective, and ultimately useless. But what you're looking at represents 40 years of refinement. We've learned how to map consciousness, how to transfer memories, how to create artificial personalities that can be implanted in receptive subjects. These men volunteered for medical studies in Mexico. They were told they'd receive treatment for neurological conditions. What they received was something far more valuable to our national security. You're creating mind-controlled agents, I said. We're creating the future of intelligence operations, Morrison corrected. Imagine being able to place an asset anywhere in the world, with perfect cover, complete loyalty, and abilities their original personality never possessed. These test subjects are refining the technology that will make that possible. And yes, the process is sometimes fatal. And yes, most of the subjects experience severe psychological trauma. But their sacrifice serves a purpose greater than their individual lives. The support vehicle arrived, a black van with 3 more agents. They moved efficiently, checking the container, securing the scene. One of them examined the broken seal and shook his head. Price approached me. "You've created a serious problem, Castellano. You've seen classified research. You've photographed test subjects. You've compromised an operation that's critical to national security. We can't let you walk away from this." "So you're going to kill me," I said. "Make it look like an accident, like all the other officers who got too curious." "That's one option," Price admitted. "But there's another possibility. You're clearly intelligent, resourceful, and dedicated. Those are valuable qualities. What if, instead of eliminating you, we brought you into the operation, gave you full clearance, showed you the bigger picture, let you understand why this research matters?" I looked at the container, at the men strapped to gurneys with metal in their skulls. "You want me to help you do this? We want you to stop fighting against something you don't fully understand," Morrison said. "This research isn't about control or oppression. It's about survival. The Soviet Union has similar programs, probably more advanced than ours. China is investing billions in consciousness research. If we don't push these boundaries, if we don't make these difficult choices, we fall behind. And falling behind in this particular arms race means losing the ability to defend our country. By torturing Mexican nationals who thought they were signing up for medical treatment," I said. "By making hard choices that soft men can't make," Price replied. "That's what leadership is. That's what national security requires. And if you can't understand that, if you can't set aside your moral qualms for the greater good, then you're not the kind of officer we need." The support team had finished their inspection. One of them approached Price and whispered something I couldn't hear. Price nodded, then turned back to me. "The subjects are stable. No permanent damage to the research." "You're very lucky, Castellano. If you'd opened the wrong cages, released contaminated subjects, we'd have no choice but to neutralize you immediately." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you make a choice," Morrison said. "You can join the operation, accept full security clearance, and help us conduct this research under proper oversight. You'd be transferred to a facility where you could contribute meaningfully instead of just waving trucks through at a border crossing. Or you can refuse, in which case we have to consider you a security risk that needs to be contained." "Contained how?" Morrison holstered his weapon. "There's a psychiatric facility in New Mexico that handles cases like yours. Officers who've experienced severe stress, seen things that compromise their mental stability. You'd be committed for evaluation, kept under observation until we're confident you're no longer a threat to operational security. It's not pleasant, but it's better than the alternative. The alternative being an accident." Price shrugged. "We prefer not to eliminate federal officers. It creates paperwork and investigations that are better avoided. But we will if we have to. Your choice determines which outcome we pursue." I looked at the container again. One of the test subjects had turned his head slightly and our eyes met. There was something in his gaze, some flicker of awareness beneath the sedation. He knew what was happening to him. He knew what he'd become. And he was begging me silently to do something. "I'll need time to think about it," I said. "You have 12 hours, Price said. "Report to the checkpoint at 6 p.m. tonight. If you accept our offer, Agent Morrison will be there with your new assignment paperwork. If you don't show up, we'll assume you've chosen to be a security risk, and we'll handle the situation accordingly." They loaded the test subjects back into the container, replaced the broken seal with a fresh one, and helped the driver change the punctured tires. Within 30 minutes, the truck was rolling north again, carrying its human cargo toward whatever fate awaited them in Midland. I drove back to Marfa in shock, my mind reeling from what I'd seen. Everything I'd suspected was true, and worse. The federal government was conducting human experimentation that made the original mkultra programs look humane by comparison, and they were doing it with complete impunity, protected by classification and backed by resources I couldn't hope to challenge. At my house, I found Santos waiting on my porch. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. "They made you the offer, didn't they?" she said. "Join or disappear? How did you know?" "Because they made me the same offer 3 years ago after I got shot. I could either accept that the operation was necessary and beyond my authority to question, or I could be treated as a compromised asset. I chose to accept it. I chose survival over principles, and I've regretted it every day since." "So you know what they're really transporting," I said. "You've known all along." Santos nodded. "I've known. I've processed trucks carrying human test subjects, knowing exactly what was inside, knowing what would happen to those people. And I did nothing because I was too afraid to be the next one who disappeared." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm a coward, Robert. I tell myself I'm protecting my daughter, that staying alive for her justifies the compromise. But really, I'm just scared. Scared of what they'll do to me if I try to expose this." "What if we both exposed it?" I asked. "Both of us coming forward with evidence, testimony, photographs. They can't disappear, both of us." "Yes, they can," Santos said. "They can, and they will. This operation has been running for 8 years without any meaningful oversight. They have relationships with media outlets, connections in Congress, the ability to discredit or eliminate any threat. 2 customs officers coming forward with wild stories about human experimentation. We'd be labeled mentally unstable, discredited, and institutionalized before our story even got published." "Then what's the point?" I asked. "If we can't expose it, if we can't stop it, why did you even come here?" "Because I wanted you to know you're not alone," Santos said. "I wanted you to understand that choosing survival doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, and I wanted to tell you that if you do choose to fight, if you can't live with yourself by accepting their offer, I'll back you up, I'll testify, I'll provide whatever evidence I've collected. We'll probably both die or end up in that psychiatric facility, but at least we'll die knowing we tried." I sat next to her on the porch steps, watching the sun come up over the desert. "What happened to the young woman?" I asked. "The one Pritchard told me about who followed a truck and ended up wandering in the desert." Santos was quiet for a moment. "That was my sister. She worked at the checkpoint before me, before they'd refined their security protocols. She followed a truck, got caught, and they dosed her with one of their experimental compounds, something that erased her short-term memory while leaving her long-term memory intact. She wandered for 3 days with no idea who she was or where she was. By the time they found her, the drug had mostly cleared her system, but she never fully recovered. She lives in a care facility now, 53 years old, with the cognitive function of a 10-year-old. "I'm sorry," I said. "So am I. But that's what they're capable of. That's what happens to people who threaten their operation, and that's why I'm telling you to seriously consider their offer. Join them, learn everything you can from the inside, and maybe someday you'll be in a position to actually change things. It's a long game, but it's the only game where you might survive and accomplish something meaningful." I thought about it all day. The 12-hour deadline approached, and I still hadn't decided. Join an operation I found morally reprehensible, or refuse and face institutionalization or death. Neither option was acceptable. but those were the only options available. At 5:30 p.m., I made my decision. I put on my uniform, loaded my service weapon, and drove to the checkpoint. Morrison was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a black sedan with the government plates. When he saw me, he smiled. "Good choice, Castellano. I thought you'd see reason." I walked past him toward the checkpoint office. He followed, still talking about my new assignment, the clearance process, the opportunities that awaited me. I let him talk while I mentally prepared for what I was about to do. Inside the office, I found what I was looking for: the evidence locker where we stored items confiscated during inspections. I pulled out the key, opened the locker, and retrieved the digital camera where I'd downloaded the photographs from last night. The photographs of the test subjects, the surgical modifications, the monitoring equipment. Everything I'd need to prove what was happening at Marfa Station. Morrison stopped talking. "What are you doing?" "Making a different choice," I said. I turned to face him, camera in one hand, weapon in the other. "I'm not joining your operation. I'm not accepting that this is necessary or justified. And I'm not going to spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have stopped it." Morrison's smile disappeared. "You're making a mistake." "Probably," I agreed. "But it's my mistake to make." I backed toward the door, keeping my weapon trained on Morrison. He didn't draw his own weapon, just watched me with that calculating expression. "You won't make it 10 miles, he said. "We have units all over this area. The moment you try to leave, they'll intercept you." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll get far enough to mail this camera to someone who matters. A journalist, a congressman, someone who can't be bought or threatened. And once these photographs are public, once people see what you're doing, your operation is finished." "You're naive if you think that's how it works," Morrison said. "We'll discredit you, discredit the photographs, discredit anyone who tries to publish them. We've been doing this for 8 years. We're very good at making problems disappear." "Then I guess you'll have to make me disappear too," I said, and backed out of the office. Santos and Reeves were outside, having just arrived for their shift. They saw me with the weapon drawn, saw Morrison following me out, and immediately understood what was happening. Santos's face went pale. "Robert, don't do this." "I have to," I said. "I can't be part of this. I can't let it continue." Reeves stepped forward. "Give me the camera. I'll destroy the photographs. We'll tell Morrison you had a breakdown, but you're going to accept treatment. You can still walk away from this." "I can't walk away," I said. "Not anymore. Not after seeing what's in those containers." "Then you're going to die," Reeves said flatly. "And for what? A few photographs that will never see publication? A story that no one will believe? You're throwing your life away for nothing." He was probably right. But as I looked at Santos, at the guilt and regret etched into her face after 3 years of complicity, I knew I couldn't end up like her. I couldn't spend the rest of my life knowing I'd chosen survival over principle, comfort over justice. "I'm sorry," I said to both of them. "I'm sorry for putting you in this position. But I have to try." I got in my truck and drove. Morrison made no attempt to stop me, just pulled out his radio and started making calls. Within minutes, I saw helicopters in the distance, black SUVs converging from multiple directions. They were boxing me in, just like Morrison had promised. I made it 17 miles before they forced me off the road. Federal agents, armed and professional, surrounded my truck with weapons drawn. I didn't resist. I stepped out with my hands up, still holding the camera. Agent Price approached, hand extended. "Give me the camera, Castellano." "No," I said. "We can take it by force if necessary." "Then you'll have to," I said, "because I'm not giving it up." Price nodded to one of his agents. They grabbed me, forced my arms behind my back, and wrestled the camera from my grip. Price checked the photos, confirmed they were still there, then smashed the camera against the pavement until it was nothing but plastic fragments and circuit boards. "You should have taken the deal," he said. "Now you're just another problem we have to solve." They put me in the back of an SUV, hands zip-tied, and drove north. Not to a psychiatric facility. Not to a federal prison. Deeper into the desert, toward coordinates I didn't recognize. As the sun set over the mountains, I realized they were taking me to a place where bodies were never found. But I'd made copies. Before leaving my house, I'd uploaded the photographs to 3 different locations. Sent them to journalists I knew from my time in El Paso. Mailed physical prints to congressional oversight committees. Even if they killed me, the evidence would surface eventually. It might take weeks or months, might be dismissed or discredited, but it would exist. Someone would see it. Someone would ask questions. The SUV stopped in the middle of nowhere. Price opened the door and pulled me out. "This is where it ends," he said. "You made your choice. You fought for your principles. I respect that, even if I think it was stupid." "Are you going to kill me?" I asked. Price pulled out a syringe. "We're going to give you a choice, same as we gave the test subjects. You can take this injection willingly, or we can force it. Either way, you're getting dosed. The compound will erase the past 72 hours from your memory. You'll wake up tomorrow with no recollection of following the truck, opening the container, or taking those photographs. You'll remember working at Marfa, but the specific details that make you dangerous will be gone. And if I refuse, then we use a different compound, one that doesn't just erase memories, one that makes you suggestible, compliant, useful. We'll turn you into exactly what you were trying to expose. Another test subject for our consciousness research." I thought about Santos's sister wandering the desert with her mind erased. Thought about the men in the cages, strapped to gurneys with metal in their skulls. Thought about all the people who disappeared over the past 8 years. Officers who'd asked too many questions and paid the price. "Third option," I said. "You let me go. I keep quiet about what I saw, and we both pretend this never happened." Price actually laughed. "That's not how this works. You're a security threat. You've seen classified research. You've compromised our operation. The only question is whether we neutralize you gently or harshly. So make your choice. The memory erasure compound, or the consciousness modification program." I looked at the syringe in his hand. The memory erasure compound. "At least I'll still be myself." Price nodded. "Smart choice. Hold him down." The agents forced me to my knees. Price swabbed my arm with alcohol, found a vein, and injected the compound. It burned going in like ice and fire mixed together. Within seconds, I felt my thoughts starting to fragment. Memories of the past 3 days became hazy, disconnected. The warehouse in Midland. The container with the cages, the photographs. The last thing I remember clearly is Price's voice, distant and echoing. "When you wake up, you'll be back in your bed at home. You'll have called in sick for 3 days with the flu. You'll return to work tomorrow and everything will be normal. You'll follow protocols. You'll wave the trucks through. And you'll never again wonder what's inside them." Then darkness. I woke up in my bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. My head felt like it was full of cotton, my thoughts slow and confused. I checked my phone. 3 days had passed since I last remembered anything clearly. According to my call log, I'd phoned in sick to the station. According to my bank account, I'd been paid for those days. According to every piece of evidence I could find, I'd simply had a bad flu and stayed home to recover. But something felt wrong. Not physically wrong, just incomplete. Like I'd forgotten something important. Something that mattered. I went back to work that night. Santos and Reeves greeted me normally, asked how I was feeling after the flu. I said I was fine, ready to get back to work. We processed the usual traffic, did the routine inspections. Around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang. Santos answered, listened, hung up. "Trucks inbound," she said. "Standard procedure." I watched them arrive. White Peterbilts with unmarked containers. Professional drivers with perfect paperwork. Agricultural equipment heading north to approved destinations. Everything was exactly as it should be, but as I waved the third truck through, I felt something. A flash of recognition, a fragment of memory that didn't quite fit. I'd seen something, known something, lost something important. I don't remember what happened during those 3 days I was sick. The flu must have been worse than usual, because there are gaps in my memory, blank spaces where time should be. Sometimes I get flashes of images I don't understand. Cages, surgical equipment, a camera smashing against pavement. But they feel like dreams, not real memories. Santos told me it's normal. Severe illness can cause temporary memory issues. The brain protects itself by forgetting the worst parts. She seems relieved that I don't remember, like she was worried about something that didn't happen. I'm still working at Marfa Station, still processing trucks 4 nights a week, still following protocols without asking questions. The pay is good, the work is steady, and I've learned not to be too curious about things beyond my authority. But sometimes, late at night when the trucks are rolling through and I'm logging their permit numbers, I get this feeling. Like I used to know something important. Like I used to care about something that mattered. And I wonder what I've forgotten. What memories were taken from me. What truth I once knew but can no longer access. Santos says I should be grateful I don't remember. Says some knowledge is more dangerous than ignorance. Says the people who remember too much are the ones who don't survive. I think she's right. I think I'm better off not knowing. Better off just doing my job, collecting my paycheck and not asking questions about the cargo I'm not supposed to inspect. But every time I wave a truck through, every time I see those unmarked containers rolling north into the darkness, I feel something. Not quite memory, not quite knowledge, just the ghost of understanding, haunting the spaces where truth used to live. And I wonder if forgetting was really the mercy they claimed it was, or if it's just another kind of prison, one where the walls are made of blank spaces and the bars are missing memories. Some cargo never makes it through inspection, and some memories never make it through the night. I'm living proof of both. I just wish I could remember why that matters.